Paul McCartney sits in his garden, older now, world-renowned, quietly powerful rather than loudly adored. He leans back in a weathered chair, the universe around him calm with slow wind, warm soil, and birds having ordinary conversations. His guitar rests on his lap, no longer a weapon of stardom, but an old companion he still greets daily. This is the man who helped reshape music itself. Along with a few Liverpool friends, he turned a cultural spark into an everlasting revolution. Everyone knows what the Beatles accomplished. They did not ride the wave of pop culture. They caused it. They engineered Beatlemania, transformed concerts into global spectacles, and accidentally wrote the blueprint for modern celebrity. More than a band, they became a historical border crossing. After them, music was never the same territory again. Yet on this tranquil afternoon, Paul McCartney pauses, smiles slightly, and cracks open a vault of his memories. Not the part about stadiums or screaming fans. Not even the part about the songs etched into the world's identity. Instead, he speaks of something unexpected, something personal, almost poetic. He reveals that certain musical forces occupy a deeply human corner of his heart, standing alongside the Beatles in ways the public never quite understood. These were the bands that shaped him, challenged him, and reminded him that greatness wears many faces. The first name that slips from his lips is the Rolling Stones. To Paul McCartney, they were never just competition. They were contrast. If the Beatles were crafted sunlight, the Stones were forged in midnight steel. They embodied a version of rock that his own band never attempted. Unpredictable, thrilling, unfiltered. Where the Beatles composed invitations, the Stones issued dares. He recalls a famous media narrative, those headlines that framed them as enemies. Fans were encouraged to play the role of musical soldiers. Magazine covers turning artistic difference into fictional warfare. But Paul understood the truth hidden behind the theatrics. It was never a feud. It was fuel. Creative tension breathed life into both camps, pushing each to heights neither might have reached alone. The Rolling Stones did not want to be adored. They wanted to be felt. Their music did not ask for participation. It demanded surrender. Paul remembers seeing Mick Jagger for the first time in his full stage form. No myth, just heat. No distance, only electricity. Skin glowing under aggressive lights, movements more animal than choreographed, charisma that felt half celebration, half warning. Next to him stood Keith Richards, guitar ringing like an open revolt, body language as readable as a thundercloud before rainfall. They did not play rebellion. They embodied it, preached it without sermon. The world called them troublemakers. Paul McCartney saw truth seekers. They took rock music off its pedestal, kicked it into the dust, and by doing so made it sacred again. Not noble, but real, honest in its imperfection, dangerous in its refusal to apologize. Paul admits that every time he watched them perform, he felt emotional whiplash. Part awe, part envy, part self-reflection. They reminded him that imperfection can speak a language of honesty, that danger can sometimes reveal more than harmony ever could. The Stones were a mirror showing him what the Beatles chose not to become, and that choice made both bands stronger. When that memory finally fades, his tone shifts. The storm clouds dissipate. His mind drifts further inward, towards something vast and brilliant precisely because it never tried to be loud. Pink Floyd. Paul remembers the first time that album flowed through his speakers. The Dark Side of the Moon. It hit differently than anything before. It did not feel like music made by humans. It felt like music explaining humans. Floyd's sound was less composition than construction, emotional engineering. Their songs were carefully assembled like cathedrals floating in space. Slow burn revelations instead of instant hooks. Unlike the mayhem of rock mythology, Pink Floyd created their legacy indirectly. They never chased attention, never acted like fame was the destination. They operated like explorers of sound and psychology, using music as both telescope and mirror, looking outward at the universe while simultaneously examining the darkness within. Paul began privately admiring how their pauses spoke as loudly as their crescendos, how they weaponized calm, how they made listeners think and feel at the exact same moment. It was cerebral rock, philosophical, infinite, emotionally astronomical. There were nights when Paul would stay behind at Abbey Road Studios by himself after songwriting sessions ended. The building buzzed with history, but long after midnight, it buzzed with Floyd instead. He often played us in them, or Wish You Were Here at earth-shaking volume, just to hear the walls carry the emotion. It was not pleasure listening. It was perspective listening. The music did not sit in the air. It occupied it, like a living atmosphere you could inhale, heavy but strangely comforting. He imagined the band creating music, not from ambition, but from ache. David Gilmour turning personal fractures into universal language. Roger Waters channeling alienation into anthems. Richard Wright and Nick Mason shaping the quiet gravitational forces, holding everything stable. Rhythmic, hypnotic, transcendental. Floyd was not just expanding the limits of rock. They were mapping an emotional universe, charting territories the Beatles had glimpsed but never fully explored. Paul believes that the Beatles changed the rules, the Rolling Stones expressed a risk, and Pink Floyd decoded the reason. One wrote history. One lived defiance. One explained existence. None of them were better in any measurable sense. They were simply bigger in different dimensions of impact. He always believed that the greatest artists are not rivals but reflections, showing us what we have not yet become. In the Beatles, Paul captured brilliance like sunrise, sharp, golden, full of possibility. But Pink Floyd arrived like the deep ocean at night. Quiet at first, then overwhelming in depth. He saw them as explorers navigating the opposite side of rock, yet still chasing the same destination. Emotional truth, sonic evolution, meaning that outlives the applause. What fascinated Paul most was their patience. Pop music demanded instant gratification, a hook in seconds, a chorus you could hum before the song even ended. Floyd rejected that instinct entirely. They composed in slow revelation. Their music did not punch the world. It absorbed it, layer by layer, like paint drying on something eternal. They trusted the power of restraint, proving that silence can be as memorable as a scream when placed in the right moment. Paul felt that Pink Floyd had inherited the same torch of curiosity the Beatles once carried, that daring spirit of experimentation, pushing beyond charts or stadium hysteria. Listening to The Dark Side of the Moon was not hearing an album. It was witnessing a universe being built in real time. But even that universe, in Paul's mind, did not roar the loudest. That honor belonged to a band that struck like lightning itself. Led Zeppelin. When Zeppelin erupted onto the scene, Paul sensed a tectonic shift in rock culture. This was no longer music as movement. This was music as force. Zeppelin did not perform. They summoned. Their songs did not enter your ears. They occupied your pulse. Jimmy Page's guitar sounded like a forge of molten stars. Robert Plant's vocals were not sung but unleashed, a primal cry that felt ancient and futuristic at once. John Bonham did not keep rhythm. He commanded armies with it. And John Paul Jones operated like the unseen gravity, holding their chaos in perfect orbit. Zeppelin fused Celtic mysticism, blues roots, untamed sensuality, and raw power into a new musical species. They blurred folklore with desire, spirituality with distortion, history with hallucination. The result felt elemental, uncontrollable, unfiltered, undeniable. Where Paul's band inspired nations to sing together from their bedrooms, Zeppelin turned arenas into ritual grounds. Paul often listened to the song, Remains the Same, and how the West was won not like a fan, but like a student observing sorcery. He studied their dynamics, their fearlessness, their willingness to stretch a song until it became something else entirely. And yet, even students can feel the tragedy when magic burns too fiercely. Paul also witnessed the invisible toll carried beneath their myth, the sleepless nights, the chemical escapes, the weight of being perceived as something larger than human. Zeppelin were men who flirted with the idea of becoming legends until the world crowned them as gods unwillingly. Their brilliance was their superpower, and eventually their greatest threat. When John Bonham passed away, Paul felt history stop breathing for a moment. It did not feel like losing a drummer. It felt like losing a chapter of rock divinity itself. The throne suddenly empty, the thunder silenced. As evening falls in Paul's garden, nostalgia does not taste bitter. It tastes bewildered, inspired, grateful. He does not mourn the crown. He admires the coronation. He realizes something rare in that moment. The Beatles created the doorway. The Rolling Stones brought the attitude. Pink Floyd expanded the mind. Led Zeppelin delivered the thunder. Each band a different instrument in the same cosmic orchestra. And though the world now speaks of Paul as a Beatle first, his heart began learning rock long before any kingdom was built. Two bands shaped his musical DNA before microphones, crowds, or history ever spotted him. He can still feel that first encounter with Pet Sounds. Like stumbling into a cathedral made of music, Abbey Road studio. Late evening, equipment humming softly in the background. When the needle touched vinyl, the world contracted to just that sound. Those harmonies did not just fill the room. They occupied it, pure and aching. Each note a small heartbreak wrapped in beauty. Brian Wilson's fingerprints were everywhere, not in the obvious places, but in the spaces between sounds, in the way a cello sighed beneath a vocal, in the architectural precision of emotional chaos. This was not music chasing charts. This was someone reaching for something just beyond human grasp. Perfection dressed as pop songs. Paul remembers the shift it created inside him. Before Pet Sounds, pop music lived in neat boxes. Verse, chorus, bridge, repeat. The Beach Boys did not break those rules. They transcended them entirely. They proved heartache could have structure, that sunshine could cast shadows, that commercial music could carry the weight of high art. It was like watching someone paint emotions in the air. That album taught him that 3-minute songs could hold infinity, that the supposedly simple could contain divine complexity. When he walked back into Abbey Road after that experience, Pet Sounds came with him, not as something to copy, but as a challenge to answer. Sgt. Pepper's was not born from imitation. It was born from inspiration, from that transatlantic conversation between artists who understood that music's only true competition was with itself. The Beach Boys were never rivals. They were kindred spirits, proof that beauty was always worth the chase. Then his thoughts turned homeward, to a band that set fire to everything the early 60s held sacred. The Who, raw, explosive, theatrical, uncompromising. Pete Townsend did not simply play guitar. He waged war with it. Each windmill swing a defiant gesture against mediocrity. Roger Daltrey's voice did not sing. It erupted, refusing to be contained by any conventional notion of melody. And Keith Moon, he did not keep time. He shattered it, turned rhythm into beautiful pandemonium, drumming like a man possessed by joyful destruction. The Who were not just a band on stage. They were a manifesto in motion. Paul remembers standing in the wings once, watching Townsend raise his guitar high overhead. That split second before the crash. Time suspended. Then the explosion, with splintering, strings screaming. The violence felt almost sacred, necessary, like the only honest response to a world that demanded conformity. But beneath the destruction lay something deeper. The Who gave anger a purpose. They showed that rage could tell truth, that pain could transcend into art, that controlled chaos could move millions. They were the bridge between the optimism of the early 60s and the fractured, questioning decade that followed. Tommy and Quadrophenia proved that rock could tell stories as complex as any novel, as devastating as any tragedy. As darkness settles over the garden, Paul considers these bands alongside his own. The Beach Boys, The Who, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. Different voices in the same conversation. Threads woven into the same tapestry. These were not just contemporaries. They were the keepers of the flame when the initial spark of rock and roll threatened to fade into nostalgia. They proved music was never meant to fossilize. It was meant to mutate, to challenge, to evolve beyond anyone's expectations. He understands now with clarity that comes only with age. Greatness is not about being first. It is about being unforgettable. The Beatles opened a door, but these other bands, the dreamers and the destroyers, the philosophers and the uncompromising, they made sure that door could never close again. McCartney watches the last light drain from the sky. Tree branches sway like metronomes, keeping time to songs only memory can hear. The garden breathes around him in that same ancient rhythm that existed long before amplifiers, before screaming crowds, before four lads from Liverpool changed everything forever. Somewhere in the rustling leaves, he hears ghost harmonies, notes that once shook stadiums now whisper to the wind. Fame, rivalry, heartbreak, triumph. All of it feels like weather from another lifetime, leaving behind only calm waters and golden horizons. He thinks of John, of George, of Ringo still keeping the beat. He thinks of those impossible studio sessions when they were inventing the future without realizing it. He remembers the faces, millions of them, strangers who somehow shared his heartbeat every time he stepped on stage. That weight once felt crushing. Now it feels like grace. A slight smile crosses his face. Maybe the Beatles were never meant to be the final chapter. Maybe they were just a chorus, the part that keeps returning generation after generation, forever echoing through time. Because every time someone picks up a guitar, chases a melody, or finds hope in three chords and a truth, they are continuing what started in that smoky Liverpool basement all those decades ago. The song does not end. It just finds new voices willing to carry it forward. The sky transforms into deep indigo. A star appears, then another. Paul looks up, nods slightly, as if answering a question the universe forgot to ask out loud. He thinks about what connects all these bands, all these musicians who gave their lives to sound. It was never really about fame or fortune or even legacy. It was about that moment when noise becomes meaning, when vibration becomes emotion, when strangers become family through shared rhythm. The Rolling Stones taught him that authenticity trumps perfection. Pink Floyd showed him that patience creates profundity. Led Zeppelin proved that power and poetry can coexist. The Beach Boys demonstrated that ambition need not sacrifice beauty. The Who revealed that destruction can be creation in disguise. And the Beatles? Perhaps they were the thread connecting all these lessons, the common language that allowed these different dialects of rock to understand each other. The music outlives the musicians. The chords never truly fade. They simply change hands, pass like torches through time, each generation adding their own verses to the endless song. As night claims the garden completely, Paul McCartney closes his eyes. He can feel it, the world breathing in rhythm with him, that quiet pulse beneath everything. The truth he has carried his entire life, through every concert and every heartbreak, through every hit and every loss. Music does not die. It only finds new hearts to call home.